There's an expression which is quoted in Maamar Chassidus that's presumably a Maamar Chazal. The direct quote, the exact words that the Maamar Chassidus bring are, quote, Tavna de liba lekasve inchi. Tavna means the lines of the heart, or perhaps the colors of the heart. Tavna de liba lekasve inchi, the lines or the spirit of the heart you can't write down. In what context is this Gemara quoted? This Gemara is quoted in the context of the deficiency of memory. I'll put it that way, the deficiency of memory. If you learn something and you write it down, and you write down what you've learned, what you've understood, what you've determined, and then you go to sleep. You come back the next day and read what you wrote. Can you go back to the same place in the learning exercise that you were the day before? So the halacha is that when rabbis are discussing the laws of a criminal case, of a person's life, they're not allowed to go to sleep when the sun sets, even though they're not allowed to determine the halacha during the night. They're supposed to stay up all night, continue discussing it, whether they discuss it as individuals or in groups, and in the morning they reconvene, and presumably by that point everybody has an opinion and they paskin. But they can't rely on the stenographers, right? There were people who wrote Divrei Hanesakim, Divrei Hamachayven. There were people in the court whose job it was to record the debate, the argument, less like lahavdil in any court of law. And they, of course, the Sanhedrin had access to that material, to those papers. But they were not allowed to rely on that. They had to stay up all night. Because there was a presumption that if they would come back the next day and read everything that they said, they wouldn't remember what they were thinking. Why? Tavna deliba lekasve inche. Every person, especially a deeper person, a realer person, whether you're dealing with ideas or you're dealing with feelings or you're dealing with senses, has a certain tavna deliba, has a spirit that's behind what they present, what they put forward, what they say, what they demonstrate. And recall, memory, allows to bring back the form, the words that you said, the emotions that you displayed, the sense, whether it's music or it's art or it's dance or it's poetry that you presented. But the tavna deliba, the neshama behind it, you cannot recollect it. Memory doesn't bring it back to you. Meaning to say, if you're going to regain the tavna deliba that you had yesterday, assuming you went to sleep and wake up in the morning and read the transcript of yesterday's conversation, it's not going to be a recall of yesterday's tavna deliba, it's going to be a new one. Because it's ephemeral, it's elusive, it's intangible, it's without form. And there is always the element of the tavna deliba lekasve inche that you simply cannot record. You can't recollect it, you can't preserve it. This idea is incredibly true, and I presume that many people, or perhaps all people, relate to it personally. And it's true in so many aspects of life. People get all kinds of inspirations on all different levels and in all different areas. And then they try to recall, they try to remember their inspiration. Now they remember what they said, they remember what they thought, they remember what they discussed, but there's something missing. What's missing is the feel, is the ruach, is the spirit of whatever it was that they were discussing or displaying or presenting, that you simply cannot get back. It's impossible to regain that ephemeral element. Now what label, what denotation, what word would we use to reference that element of an idea, of a feeling, or of a sense that is lost when you interrupt and you revisit something? So I'm going to give you two terminologies which are both classic Hasidic terminologies that both represent the same idea, and whichever word is more comfortable for you is fine. One word would be oir. Ideas are logical, they're explicable, and they're even debatable. You can argue with somebody else. You can iron it out by argument and counter-argument. Behind every idea there's a light, there's an neshama. That neshama light you cannot say, you certainly cannot prove, and you certainly cannot debate it. It's coming from your neshama. It's coming from a place in you which is not yet intellectual. It's more essence, it's more your spirit than what can come down into ideas. In other words, as we've discussed so many times, Torah's belief, Chassidus belief, is that all actual things, whether it's ideas or feelings or senses, come from something much deeper. They come from the nefesh, they come from the neshama. But on the neshama level, they're not metzias enough, they're not formed enough, and to use the Hasidic form, there's not yet oiris and kalim, oisius and oir, by which you can grasp it and share it and debate it and analyze it and criticize it and correct it and prove it. And every meaningful thing, whether it's intellectual, emotional, or sensual, has a light behind it. Another way to say the same would be the word tainug. Tainug really is an alternative word for oir HaNefesh. Just like there's the light of the soul, there's the delight of the soul. And tainug, the delight of the soul, basically means the neshama's personality on a level that's Ein Sof. The personality of you or somebody else or whoever it is, that's your infinity, that's delighted by this or that, or by saying this way as opposed to saying this some other way, and so on. And it's the real spirit, it's the real pnimius, it's real neshama behind discussion, behind feeling, and behind life. It's the element of ourselves that's the realest part of ourselves that we cannot share, and we cannot defend, and we cannot explain, but it's the truth. In other words, if you're involved in conversation with other people, assuming that you and those other people share a common interest, you can debate, you can discuss, you can share intellectual aspect, intellectual dimension. But your neshama and their neshama are different neshamas. And as a consequence, you'll say it one way and they'll say it another way. You'll understand each other intellectually. But the spirit or the feel which is hidden behind it is very distinctive. It's distinct. Your light or your delight is unique to you. His or her delight or light is distinct to them. That never is shared. It's always individual and it's always hidden. It's always part of the neshama. They tell a story that the Rebbe's mother used to say, and I believe I read it in a written text about somebody who knew them when they were children, that the Rebbe and the Rebbe's father and the Rebbe's brother Label would have debates on philosophical ideas, mystical ideas, that could go on for weeks at a time. An issue was presented, each one would say his thing, and they would come back to it again and again and again and again. And each one spoke a different language. Rabbi Leivik spoke the language of Kabbalah, the Rebbe spoke the language of Chassidus, Leibel spoke the language of Chakira, of logic, of philosophy. They understood each other, but they spoke in different languages. So they met on the field of intellect. They met on the arena of ideas. But the soul, which was the core of their being, in the case of Leibel it was Seichel, in the case of the Rebbe's father it was what we would call Yeina Shel Torah, the intoxicating part of Torah, which is Kabbalah. And in the case of the Rebbe it was Razan Shemen, the oil of Torah. They could share where these three schools of thought convened, but they couldn't share where these three schools of thought were distinctive, because this is who they were. Now, why am I sharing this insight with you? I'm sharing this insight with you because our Maimon is presenting a fascinating interpretation of the concept of Nichnas Yayin Yotza Seid. Our Maimon discusses the classic idea that when you drink wine, so of course if you drink wine excessively it makes you sick, makes you fall asleep, as he suggests. But if you drink wine correctly, and I didn't say responsibly, because the connotation of the word responsibly means that you really shouldn't drink any of it. And if you're going to drink some, drink responsibly. I'm talking about drinking wine which is a part of Avodas Hashem, where the drinking wine is actually in the service of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So Nichnas Yayin Yotza Seid, when people drink wine, the way a Yid, the way a Chassid, the way a servant of HaKadosh Baruch Hu drinks wine, Yotza Seid reveals a secret. So the Alter Rebbe explained the meaning of Nichnas Yayin Yotza Seid, and he said, all people and all things have a pnimius and a chitzenius, have a face and a rear, have an inner dimension and an outer dimension. And he explained it very simply in the following way. The pnimius dimension of a person is the part of the person that he doesn't share. The chitzonius dimension of the person is the part of the person that he does share. The pnimius dimension of the person is the part of the person that's ascending, that's going deeper into self and becoming less and less formed. The chitzonius of the person is the part of the person that's descending and becoming more and more formed and radiating out of the person to outside of the person. And the rule is that whether you're talking about an idea, a feeling, or a sense, what you communicate is the chitzonius of how that idea, feeling, or sense is experienced by you. You communicate the idea and not its light or delight. You communicate the feeling and not its light or delight. You communicate the art form, whether it's music or it's dance or it's art or it's poetry or it's prose. But the neshama, the oyer, the tainug, your personality, which is the true driving force, the true motivation, and the true experience, feel of whatever it is that you're presenting, is concealed. So the Alter Rebbe says, Nichnas Yayin Yotza Seid, when a person drinks wine, they reveal their pnimius. In other words, the effect that wine, which means, in other words, joy, has on a person isn't only that they're more demonstrative, that they give out more of themselves, that they share. But Nichnas Yayin Yotza Seid effect that an element, a dimension, a layer of self, which is really not shareable and not communicable, emerges and comes out. A person who's in a state of joy doesn't only give more information, express more of his feelings, but he actually somehow gives out and expresses a level of himself in terms of his ideas, feelings, and senses which normally are simply not expressible. This doesn't mean that he's able to communicate to somebody else his inner light and delight, but it does mean that another person can sense it. In Chassidus, when they talk about this concept, they bring two examples for it. One of them is Tzov uponov shalabavo shemotza teisefta chadate, and the other is that Zayar zolgu einov shabakiva dmois. One is that the Rabavo's face radiated, it shone, it glowed when he found a new braise. And zolgu einov shabakiva dmois, the Bakiva cried when he was revealing secrets of Torah. In that radiant face and in those tears, you don't have more information. You don't know the pnimius of that other individual in a way which increases the data, the material, the stuff that he's communicating in words or in feelings or in an art form. But you sense it. And sensing the pnimius of another human being, albeit it's a makif sense, in other words, you cannot digest it, you cannot break it down, you cannot interpret it and prove it and debate it and argue it and tweak it, but it has an incredible effect on a person even though you cannot grasp it. The illustration for this, and this is you discussed in Samach Vav a little bit, is the concept of Chochmas Adam Ta'ir Panav. Chochmas Adam Ta'ir Panav means a person's face says things about a person that his words could never say, that his feelings could never demonstrate, and that his chushim can never present. When the Maamar Chassidus bring this concept of Chochmas Adam Ta'ir Panav, they bring a Gemara. That the Gemara says that Rabbeinu HaKadosh, who was the compiler of the Mishnah, said of himself, Hode mechadad netfei mechaveroi, this that I am sharper than my friends, my chaverim in yeshiva, which is why he was able to be the one to actually compile the Mishnah and write the Mishnah down and so forth, is mishum de chamina le Rab Meir me'acherev. I saw Rab Meir's back. What does this mean? In the times of the Shas, times of the Chazal, in the earlier generation certainly, the Rav, or the Rebbe, or the Ramban, or the Av Bezdin, or the Nasi, depending on his Madrege, sat. either on one pillow or two pillows or three pillows or four pillows or five pillows. And the students all stood in circles. Nobody sat. Later on, they made a takana that they were allowed to sit down. But Torah was learned ba'amida, standing up. And they stood in rows. The arrangement of the students in the rows around their teacher was not arbitrary. It wasn't who came first who pushed harder. It was based on your level. The senior Talmud faced the Rav in the first row. And all the lesser Talmidim stood in a circle around the Rav. And the lowest Talmud in the first row, who stood behind his Rebbe, was superior intellectually to the greatest Talmud in the second row, who would face the Rav but have to see through the back of one person directly in front of him. And that's how they stood. So if the Rebbe sat and the Talmidim stood, if you were in the second row, and certainly if you were in the third or fourth row, you could see nothing, you could only hear. Rabbi was in the first row, behind Reb Meir, which tells you there was a whole slew, a whole handful of Talmidim greater than Abbeinu HaKadosh. V'haraya, they stood facing Rebbe, or to the sides of Rebbe, and he stood behind Rebbe. And Abbeinu HaKadosh is saying, compared to the students in the second row, in the third row, in the fourth row, I was machaded, that I was sharper, because I could see the back of his head. Now, what do you gain by looking at your Rebbe from the back of the head? Now, of course, I don't know the answer to that question, but obviously Rabbi HaKadosh said it because to him it was a real thing. There was a message, there was a communication that is not words. It's much, much deeper than words. And to use, again, the Chassidic terminology, which is part of the Oyer, or the Tainug, of his Rebbe, Reb Meir, which Rabbeinu HaKadosh sensed, which didn't give him more information, but it changed the information that he gathered, that he got. It added a certain depth to it, a certain light to it, that allowed him to understand deeper than a Talmud was not able to see his Rebbe. And that's the meaning of the phrase, Chochma Sodom Toyer Ponav. Looking at a person's face increases nothing in terms of information, but it changes how the information settles with you, because it has a certain ephemeral, certain ruchnistic additional aspect. So the Alter Rebbe says in this Maimon, that wine and joy has an effect on a person that it reveals the pnimius. And it does reveal the pnimius on a level. We are able to understand it because the pnimius is not understandable. But it reveals the pnimius in such a way that by the virtue of the fact that you have aspect to this oir, the chayes or the avona v'asaga, which you're able to understand, which reaches you, is enhanced and enriched. And of course, the Alter Rebbe's point is this: the concept of nesach. The Beis HaMikdash was designed to reflect the life of human beings. People live a certain way, and the Beis HaMikdash was meant to be the same kind of a home. The difference, of course, is that in the case of people, our lives are meant to bring us up. If we didn't eat, if we didn't sleep, if we didn't have a safe place, and so on, we would not be able to survive. HaKadosh Baruch Hu mirrors how we live in his own home, but for him it's the reverse. It's Yosef Tehillas Yisrael. It's he descends to be in this arena, this level, in this framework, in order to give us a relationship with him. And therefore, every aspect of the Beis HaMikdash reflected the aspect of familiar life, of a home. And in the Eibish's case, it was his vehicle, it was his medium, it was his form through which he came closer to us. Accordingly, every aspect of what happened in the Beis HaMikdash reflects a home, and there are so many discussions in Sfarim and in Chassidus explaining these corollaries, these comparisons, these equals. And one of them is that the bread and the wine and the oil and the meat of a korban were the equivalent of the bread and the oil and the wine and the meat that a human being would eat in a suda. But in the case of a human being, he's eating to keep his neshama and guf together so the guf shouldn't die. In the case of the Eibush Tekvayachol, the eating is meant to keep the neshama and the guf together so that the neshama shouldn't go away. And one of the aspects is yayin. And as you'll see soon in Mitzvah Hashem, that the Rebbe is going to explain to us that the food that the Mizbeach eats, or that the Kohen eats, is part of the Ratzu, is what we're raising up the HaKadosh Baruch Hu to bring his life down. And the wine and the joy which came along with the korban was that now that the Eibishter is in Hishtalshlos, is in Atzilos, through the wine, the Eibishter comes down to the lower world as well. And again, it's the same principle. Nichnas yayin yatzasei, the wine that was poured on the Beis HaMikdash, caused a revelation of a greater godliness in an indirect way, in an ephemeral way, but had a real effect on everybody around them. So let's begin on line 66. Umayata, at this point, having explained what wine does, it brings joy to a person. And the joy reveals a pnimius, a level of a person which is really not fully revealable and is normally not revealed. So we have to explain karbonos. And again, karbonos would be what we're giving to Hashem in sacrifice. We're raising up to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And the nesech would be what we get back in return, the gili alakus, which comes milmayla lamata as a consequence of what we're giving HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Kihine pulas hamaychel, on a physical level, on a down-to-earth level. What is the effect that food has on a person? Lechaber chayes hanefesh hamaguf. It joins the life that comes from the neshama with the body. The neshama is infinite. The body is finite and complex. So there's a lot of steps between the infinity of the neshama and the finite complex guf. But in the end, whatever of the neshama can come into the guf needs the involvement of food to join the life from the neshama with the body. Continues the Rebbe on line 68. V'agam, although shabakeyach hanefesh hatzmei, the neshama by itself, yeshkeyach ha'espashtos lahaches haguf, has the capacity to expand, to radiate, and to come out of its, so to speak, essence, to give life to the body. Nevertheless, it's not enough for life to meet the body. Life must make the body living, and for this you have to have food. As the pasuk says, that eating bread, levav enesh yisad, it sates, it nourishes the heart of the person. Uksiv, and the second pasuk says, visadu lipcha, you have to bring seuda, you have to bring satiation to the heart. Ayin bepirush Rashi, pirush, shahalechem, that the bread, seyed umaylas halev, it conditions and raises up the heart, lekabel achayis, to receive life, min hamoyach, from the mind, whatever the idea of getting life from the mind means, but the food being in between the guf and the neshama allows the neshama and the guf not just to touch, but to fuse and to become one. Now, of course, this goes to the classic idea, the truly classic idea of which have in Kisvei Arizal, that when a person eats food, two processes are taking place. The physical substance of the food, the chemicals and the vitamins and so on, are broken down and become part of the body of the person. The neshama of the food, the ruchnius in the food, joins with the ruchnius of the neshama to keep the neshama and the guf together, because the nature of the soul is up, the nature of the body is down. And it says in Amah, it's brought in Chassidishe, that it's keach hamafli lases lechaber ruchnius v'gashmius. The joining of soul and body is a miracle. And food, for a variety of different reasons, acts as the medium not just to qualify the body to receive life, but to encourage the life of the neshama to join with the body. And he spells it out. V'hainu. How does food have this effect? Achar, a person eats, and then she is bared amaychel beitztumka. The food is broken down and separated in the stomach. What happens when it's separated in the stomach? Shapselas v'chitenis shemamaychel, the waste and the periphery which in that food, nitchel lechutz, it's pushed out. V'heilech, and it journeys derech hakravayim, through the intestines, lechutz, outside. V'amuvcha, the choicest of what's in that food, the level of mayach, ascends into the heart, into the brain, to nourish the body biologically and spiritually. Life descends from the mind into the heart, into all the limbs of the person. This is a long conversation, which is mentioned in Tanya chapter 51, Perek Nun Aleph, that the neshama goes into the brain, but the neshama in the brain is removed from physicality altogether. The neshama in the heart, which we call ruach, is linked to the blood, and the neshama, which is in the lower third of the body, which we call nefesh, is in the kidneys or in the liver, and so on. So the ruchni is the kachayis, which is in the moyach, which is very spiritual. descends from there to the heart and joins with the blood to be more material, to be more gashmiistic. In other words, either the blood, like it says, Amol shteit, dam hu ha-nefesh. And sometimes it says, nefesh ha-basar ba-dam hi. Sometimes it says the blood itself is nefesh. Sometimes it says that there's life in the blood, however that contradiction is resolved. But the moyach is very edel. The chayes, the life in the moyach, which is called neshama, is not at all connected to the material. In the heart, it joins through the blood. And the process by which this happens is because the person eats. The food is very necessary in order for this process to take place. So if we wouldn't eat, the neshama would become more spiritual, the body would become more physical, and we wouldn't be able to live. So the joining of neshama and guf is through food. So in the Beis HaMikdash was karbanos, meat. The carbon represented metaphysically, or by way of analogy, just like you have it physically in a person. In the Beis HaMikdash had sacrificed karbanos, which is called lachmi liisha, the so-called bread of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But it's not chas v'shom that without this bread Hashem wouldn't live. But rather, without this bread, Hashem wouldn't descend to be involved in the world, in Atzilus and so on. So the Karban was creating a vehicle, which is both a physical thing with a spiritual life, for the joining of the spirituality, for the godliness of Elokus, and worldliness to fuse. That can be understood on high. The Pasuk says, Hashem provides life for all things. In other words, just like biological life, which is a physical thing, has various aspects, material aspects and spiritual aspects. Similarly, the spiritual world, it parallels biological life. There's an inner aspect and an outer aspect. And just like physically, there is the physical person and the spiritual person. And you have to join together the physical and the spiritual through life. The same is true through food and the life which was in the food. The same is true in the spiritual worlds. The bringing down of godliness and bringing it in proximity closer to worldliness is through food, says the Alter Rebbe, which is the concept of a korban. And he develops the idea and he says, there's a whole process by which this food is made clear. How it ascends from the lower worlds to the higher worlds. There's a whole discussion in Chassidus, I believe it's based on Isaiah, that says that there are malachim, angels that are called kiravayim. Kiravayim means intestines, where things are digested. And when a karban is offered to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, its journey upward from Asiyah to Atzilus passes through the malachim called intestines that process that karban. Hamu Me'ai also means intestines, which is again an allusion to malachim that act metaphysically, spiritually, as the ones that process, metabolize the karban which is offered up from earth to heaven. And the Alter Rebbe explains Shesh Malachim Shebechinas say Nayim Eini Avadim Malachim, which are called the Eibishter's eyes. V'yesh Bebechinas as Nayim the Malachim, which are called the Eibishter's ears. V'yesh Bebechinas Kravayim, and there are Malachim which are called the Eibishter's intestines. Sheim Hamavarim, that take the karban and separate it out. Shapseles Nitchel Chutz, the aspect of the karban which is waste is disposed. Shubechinas Hashpach Hitzenius, which is also going to provide life to the world, but on peripheral levels. Sheyeded beribo yishtalshos will redescend through much yishtalshos. Achamatzmiach kol chotzer tefuah, that's going to provide the basis for life of grain and grass and so on. Ukmesha kosov mimeget tefuah shamish, that the sweetness of grain comes from the sun and so on. So every aspect of the karban is useful. But the chitzenizdika aspect of the karban are going to provide life on a chitzenizdika level, namely to provide daimim and semeach and chay and so on. But the best of the karban is going to ascend into Atzilus and go into the heart, which is the supernal throne of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which basically is Elam Abriya or Malchus of Atzilus, which is myriads of malachim, Machane Mechol Be'ava, Machane Gavriel Be'yira. There's camps of malachim that number millions and billions or hundreds of millions of malachim In the camp of Michal, it's Ava. In the camp of Gavil, it's Yira. Asher beklolam nikrayim leiv. Collectively, these malachim, which represent Bria or Malchus of Atzilus, are the Eibish's heart, so to speak. We offer a physical piece of meat, but we offer it with a certain kavanah and with a certain spirit. And the malachim are mavaded, and what's less than ideal is disposed of, and it provides life on superficial levels. And what's most ideal is raised up, Sayyid, Halev, Elyon, it sates, it nourishes the supernal heart. And again, Beklal says is Malchus of Atzilus. Liyas Eila lekabel chayes ben hameach. And by the carbon ascending to the heart, so the heart is now given additional life, which empowers it to ascend and bring down life from the Mayach, which is Chochmah. Reach nichoyach. Reach means a spirit that ascends, nichoyach to cause a spirit to descend. Lahavaya, v'anashe bechinas habehema. Eila, the animal ascends, bechinas pnei sheir. Each animal has to do with one of the animals which are the faces of the legs, or the carriers of the divine chariot. And the physical animal ascends to pnei sheir, to eventually ascend into Atzilus and bring Chayes down. Uksiva Chayes Nesis as a Kisev Gamer, the animals that hold up the chair raise up Elikus. When you bring a Korban, it raises up Elikus, and really what that means is that more of godliness is coming down into this world. That's the purpose of doing a Korban. Bechinas Halah, that you take something from this world and you give it to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Bechinas Maichel, you take something from this world and you make it into food for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And the purpose is lechabed ispashtus hachayis, that the expansion of life, or Ein Sof, which comes down from higher than Atzilus into Atzilus and a Malchus and Atzilus, and so forth. Lahachis kol ha'elam is to give life to all other worlds, bebechinas v'ata machayev v'gemer, in a way of giving life. But there's chitzenius hachayis, which comes from the klipa, from the chitzenius, and there's pnimius hachayis, which comes from the pnimius of a korban, which by itself is going to remain in Atzilus. Now I want to digress, and I may be making a mistake, because I'm now going to go off on a tangent, which is something that I wish to discuss, but it's not directly connected to this Maimer. It's just something which is on my mind that I want to share. And I hope that when I'm finished, it's not going to take me very long, we'll go back to the Maimer, and this will not become a distraction which derails the continuity, the flow of the Maimer. We've had this conversation before in other contexts and in other words. One of the great discussions of Anshe Machshava, of theologians, of Jewish theologians, is the question of mides or koiches. This is a very, very old conversation. It goes back at least 1,000 years. And the simple way to ask the question is, does Hashem see? And once you answer the question if Hashem sees, you would then follow up that question with the question, does Hashem have eyes? And the same is true, does Hashem hear? And once you answer that question, that'll be followed up by the question, does Hashem have ears? Right? And the pasuk that you know, Hanoita oizen haloi yishma, if he gave you an ear, he must be able to hear. Im yetzer ayin haloi yabad, if he formed for you an eye, he has to be able to see. But that doesn't address the question of whether it's ears and eyes. It simply addresses the question that he can see or hear. And the same is true in our Maimer. Can Hashem metabolize? Does Hashem digest? Does Hashem process? Now somehow Hashem seeing and hearing sounds much more profound than Hashem digesting. But it's really the same question. And it's involved. It's a long, complicated story. It's by no means easy to answer that question, because you're always going to get into the question of Achdus. If you say yes, then you're dealing with many. He has eyes and ears. How can one God have many aspects? And if you say no, you're in effect making Hashem into nothing. If Hashem's infinity prevents him from seeing and hearing and so on and so forth, he has no relationship with our world. So it's a very complicated question. And there's different opinions. It comes down to the big difference between philosophers and mystics, Chakrim and Mekubalim, non-mystics, non-Mekubalim, and yes Mekubalim. They all have different approaches. And one of the basic divisions in this question is Nivdalim versus Netiyas. Nivdalim basically means Malachim, and Netiyas basically means Spheres. The difference between a Malach and a Sphira is a Malach is a Nivra. A Malach is a created entity that's not only limited, but is separate from Hashem. Which means that ideally, a Malach is really Klipa, because only Klipa is separate from Hashem. Elam Abri is also Klipa, because it's separate from Hashem. Netiyas means Spheres that are one with Hashem. They're only expressions of Hashem. They're called Hashem's lights. And some people answer the question of how, does Hashem have midas, by saying that there are malachim that see, malachim that hear, malachim that digest, as it says in our Maamar. That is, malachim called his eyes, malachim called his ears, malachim called his intestines. What you gain by that is saying Hashem himself is posher b'tachas apshitos. Hashem is above every form. When it says in the psukim he sees, he hears, and he digests, it means the malachim. There are problems with that as well. Kabbalah has a very different approach to these questions. Kabbalah says that the spheres see and hear and digest, which of course has to be understood in a very different way than the malachim seeing and hearing and digesting. And then of course there's the third option. And the third option is that we're not talking about malachim, we're not talking about spheres, we're talking about atzmos. And when you're talking about atzmos, you really cannot say seeing, hearing, and you certainly cannot say digesting. You can only say, in quotes, Yodua. He's not lacking what seeing would provide. He's not lacking what hearing would provide. He's not lacking what birur or what kravayim would provide. So when our Maamar says it is malachim that digest, metabolize, the impression that you get is that it's a very, very material thing. There's actually a bunch of angels flying around whose job it is to take what we give Hashem and refine it and bring it to the next level. And that's true. But appreciate that there's layers in this. There's a layer of kravayim, which are malachim, and then there's of course a higher level, which you're talking about spheres, and there's a higher level, you're talking about Ein Sof, where these ideas are even more refined. So I'm just sharing this to give clarity about the allusion to malachim that are kravayim, malachim that are einayim, malachim that are eznayim, so that people should get confused between what says in one Maamar versus what says in another Maamar. The point is that we give Hashem a korban, and the korban gives him life. That means to say it encourages him to come forward and be invested in this world or in Atzilus and be manifesting his life in Atzilus. But the digestive process from our korban is that the chitzonius provides life for the chitzonius ha'elamis, and the pnimius provides life for the pnimius ha'elamis, and the pnimius, which provides life for pnimius ha'elamis, remains an elamis ha'pnimiyim. That means to say, when you bring a sacrifice, the inner, deeper, finer aspects of the sacrifice, which is going to bring life on a finer, deeper, inner level, is going to remain finer and inner and deeper, in other words, hidden. And now let me share a story, a vart. And of course there's more than one such vart, but I recently came across this because I am currently reading the sefer called Avnei Chanin, which is a fascinating read on the history of the Mishpachas Chanin and the number of incredibly great Chassidim that family has given us. So one of the stories, a story about the Peretz HaGodel. The Peretz Chaim was a very, very great Chassid, a truly giant Chassid of the Mittel Rebbe and the Rebbe the Tzemach Tzedek. He passed away after the Rebbe Marash. He was by the Rebbe Marash also. He knew the Rebbe Rashab, and he actually saw the Frierdiker Rebbe. He's the Chassid that we know saw 6 Rebbes. So here's the story. The Tzemach Tzedek was an incredibly great Rebbe. It's probably correct to say that Lubavitch peaked by the Tzemach Tzedek. After the Tzemach Tzedek was nostalgic, Lubavitch was divided into a number of different groups, and the cohesion and the giant size that the Tzemach Tzedek knew of Lubavitch was certainly not repeated till our times, and we can debate if even now Lubavitch has reached the same numbers. But by the Tzemach Tzedek, Lubavitch was huge. And it wasn't only large in Kamos, it was very, very large in Eichos. Some of the greatest Rabbonim in Russia, some of the greatest minds in the world were the Tzemach Tzedek's Chassidim. And Shavuos, they all came to Lubavitch. And the Tish by the Tzemach Tzedek Shavuos was so grandiose, it was so honorable, it was such a kavod, it was such a Shulchan Malachim, in every sense of the word. So there's a story that goes like this. This is brought in this Sefer Avnei Chain, that the Tzemach Tzedek asked to be mispalpal and limud with his Chassidim. The Chassidim came to Lubavitch. Amongst them he had great goinim, including the Teras Chesed, Rabbi Yosef Tamarkin, and there were other goinim, great goinim that came to Lubavitch, and of course amongst them was the Peretz HaGodel. Mistama you also had Rabbi Isaac Homler, Rabbi Isaac Vitebsk, Rabbi Lupadecher, the Peretz Chain. And the Rebbe said he Poshet wants to talk and learning, Shmuas and Lenin. All of the Chassidim disappeared into the shadows. Because you cannot have a conversation with the Rebbe in learning unless you can debate. And debate means you have to argue. How do you argue with the Rebbe? How do you disagree with anything the Rebbe says? So they all shied away. The Peretz offered to do it. The Peretz Chain. He was a Yid Bechlal, the Chain Mishpacha Bechlal. And the Peretz particularly was a Yigba Liba B'Dark Yavai. They're very breite Menschen. They were big Chassidim. They were Evdei Lakim. They were Batal Yidden, but they were also breite Menschen. However you explain that in modern terms. But he agreed. And it says in the footnote that one of the Mashpiyim explained that most Chassidim have a Tnu of Ratzu, Bittel. And the Peretz has a Tnu of Shuv, whatever the Rebbe wants. The Rebbe wants to talk and learning, we'll talk and learning. So the Tzemach Tzedek had a night of Yechidus, and when all the other people had gone, the Peretz went in last, so Red mit the Rebbe and Lenin to talk to the Rebbe in learning. And they talked, and they argued. They did exactly what the Tzemach Tzedek wanted. The Peretz saw that on the table there were 3 piles of money. And he found it curious that there was money on the table and that it was divided up into 3 piles. So as part of his breite character, he decided to experiment to find out if there's any precision, any exactness in these 3 piles of money. So he moved coins from one pile to another pile as they're talking. Tzemach Tzedek, as they're talking, moves the coins back. And this happens back and forth. And it becomes very obvious that the money is in different piles with precision. So that finally the Peretz says to the Tzemach Tzedek, Rebbe, what's this 3 piles of money? I move it here, you move it back. So Tzemach Tzedek said, Chassidim come into mit Yechidus. Some people give their money, give their pidyenis and their money from a place of incredible pnimius. Other people give their pidyenis and their money with an incredible hidur tshuva. Other people give their pidyenis and their money with no hergesh at all. And the Rebbe said, "Mekenish ois mission di geld mit di geld." You can't confuse the money that was given with a place of great pnimius to a chassid whose money was a hidur tshuva, to a chassid whose money had no gefil. So here's a Rebbe doing a birur. People are giving him material things which he is going to use for who knows what, and he's mavarer. First he separates the money, and then he determines where each collection of wealth will go based on the birur. And you have to assume, like in the Maimir, the money which was given with a more pnimius purpose goes to more pnimius purpose. The money that was given with a much more chitzenius gefil goes away for dvarim chitzenium. And this is what happens to food, and this is what happens to karbanos. Now we're on line 95. So when a person eats, they bring the neshama and the guf together. Some of the food is going to bring the neshama and the guf together on very chitzenius levels. Some of the food is going to bring the neshama and the guf together on very pnimius levels. And the same is true lamaila. Some of the carbon is going to become pseilus and waste, which is going to provide life in very superficial things. Some of the carbon is going to become pnimius and is going to provide life in the most pnimius levels. And as we discussed in last week's class, the pnimius always remains hidden. So the Rebbe continues and he says, after the carbon there was a nesach. Now you'll see later on that the nesach consisted of 3 parts: oil, wine, and flour. But the part that's relevant at the moment, of course, is the wine, because it's the yayin that's nichnas yayin, yatzasei, that reveals the pnimius and so forth. What's the concept of the wine? It draws down and reveals the pnimius. Which also the Torah describes, there's a concept of Hashem giving us His pnimius. But notice, how does Hashem give us His pnimius? In the form of a radiation of oir. And nesech sheicher lahavaya. The wine that we pour on the Mizbeach was meant to have an intoxicating effect, a revealing effect on Shem Havaya, that Bechina Seva Kalam, godliness which is removed and hidden, should be brought forward. Vezehu, which is the concept of Yayin HaMesamech Elokim V'Geimim. There's a level of godliness called Elokim, which is the basis for Teva, for the world. And the Yayin Mesamech Elokim, the wine, brings forward the Pnimius to the level of Chitanius. In other words, Bechinas Hamshacha Milmayla Lamata, to draw down from heaven to earth. Says the Rebbe on line 117, V'lachein, and accordingly, L'chol Korban Einyan Hanesachim, every carbon came with a libation, with wine. Ki ikir ha'lo, the reason for the carbon in the first place is b'shvil hamshacha shachakach. It's what follows by bringing down. Now understand what the Rebbe is saying here. You bring a carbon to keep heaven and earth together, just like you eat food to keep body and soul together. But it's not enough to keep body and soul together. It's not enough to keep heaven and earth together. Why? Because then you're alive and you have no meaning. You have to keep heaven and earth together and reveal the heaven of heavens to earth. You have to keep body and soul together and reveal the pnimius, the dimension of the neshama whose nature is to remain hidden, to remain subliminal, to remain without manifestation, because it's so ruchniistic, it's light and delight, as I discussed in the introduction, should also be brought forward. And that doesn't happen with the food, it happens from the wine. Says the Rebbe, that's the pshat in the Gemara, kol hakei kriyashma b'lei tefillin. You said krishma, and you didn't put on tefillin. And krishma corresponds to the korban, to the sacrifice. And tefillin corresponds to the libation, to the wine, which draws down kilu ikir ve'le mincha. You brought a korban, but there was no mincha with it. V'zeh v'chi brought a korban shlomim. B'lei nesachim, there was no wine with it. In other words, shein korban klum. The carbon was useless. Now you cannot call it useless. Why not? It keeps the body and soul together in the metaphysical terms. So why is it useless? Shalehim shechklum. It's not enough that the carbon should keep heaven and earth together. Like food keeps body and soul together, the carbon has to bring pnimius of elokus into this world. Like a person's food has to bring the pnimius of the neshama into this world. And that's only b'lei mincha and nesachim. For this you have mincha and nesachim. So to go back to last week's class and introduction, in the Midbar, it didn't matter. In the Midbar was about sacrifice. If you did not bring a pnimius of elokus down into this world, then of course in the person's avoided, that means the pnimius of the neshama down into the person, it was fine. Because in the Midbar, everything was one-dimensional. The purpose was to sacrifice to Hashem. The issue was to be as close to HaKadosh Baruch Hu as possible and as far removed from this world as possible. But when the Jewish people come into the Holy Land, this changes basically. Now, the ikir of a korban is not the sacrifice, although the sacrifice is so important. It's that as a result of the sacrifice, the pnimius of elokus is revealed into this world. So this explains the interface between the korban and the nesach. And now the Rebbe breaks it down. So far, we spoke only about wine. For obvious reasons, because wine intoxicates. But now he breaks down into three. The nesach involved oil, wine, and flour. Now, of course, the way it was the oil and the flour were burnt on the Mizbeach, and the wine was poured into the shita, into these little nostril-like tubes, which went down into the Tehoim and went out into Nachal Kidron. So, specifically, a mincha and a nesach has three parts. Of those three, two also are consumed, and the third goes down into the Tehoim. The difference between the two and the third you'll see later on the next page, beginning with line 140. But on the next 15 lines, the Alter Rebbe is going to break it up into three and say, you eat food to keep your soul and body together. You drink wine to reveal soul in the body, to bring joy. But by the same token, you eat oil, which means you bring richness into your life. And you eat bread, as you'll see momentarily, to bring depth into your life. And each of these three things are paralleled in a korban. And I'm going to tell you the punchline. Shemen is chokhmah, yayin is bina, and lechem is das. Says the Rabbi Einyan Hanesachim, who the concept of the mincha and the nesach. Who bechinas hamshachas chokhmah bina das. The oil brings down chokhmah, the wine brings down bina, and the kemach brings down das, lamata, into this world, v'chulu. In other words, all three of these components, all three of these ingredients had the effect of not just keeping soul and body together in the metaphysical sense, but revealing pnimius. Shem and oil is the concept of chokhmah, and I discussed with oil with you last week a little bit. Shem and oil always is removed. And the two opposite characteristics of oil is just like Chassidus. Everybody knows exactly what Chassidus is, and no one has a clue what Chassidus is. Oil pervades everywhere, it penetrates everywhere, and it's removed from everything. This contradiction, this dichotomy, represents Chokhmah. The pnimius of the neshama, which is brought down through Shemen, is available everywhere, it's revealed everywhere, and no one knows what it is. It's brought in Kisvei Arizal, in Pardes, and the Rebbe quotes it, that there's shemen, richness in everything, afilu ma'avanim, even in stones. And it says in the parenthesis, alim, I don't know what this means. This is some kind of a physiological illusion. But spiritually speaking, the source of every creation is the Eibishter's geschmack in having created it. And the offering of shemen is bringing forward that geschmack. Everything begins, even Asiya begins with chokhmah. Everything has oil, chokhmah. And when you brought a nesach, the oil aspect of the mincha and the nesach revealed the pnimius of Elokus on the chokhmah level. The flour, the fine flour, bechinas das. What's the relation between flour and das? He brings the Gemara, which we all know from the Pesach, from the Matzah. And bread gives a child das. And he brings the other Gemara, and this of course goes on Zohar as opposed to Malchus. What's das? Das means when you eat bread, you have a certain integrity, a certain depth. And again, this is a concept of the pnimius coming down. The shemen aspect of the mincha and the nesach brought down the pnimius on a level where, like I said before, everybody has it and nobody has it. The kemach, the soilus, the bread aspect of the mincha and the nesach brought down the pnimius level of das. It adds to your integrity. And then of course, Hanesachim shehem yayin hu bechinas bin. And the libation, the part that we have been discussing until this point, which is the wine, corresponds to bina. Bina means understanding, which means gishmak, pleasure, delight. And bina also means that it gives joy, it intoxicates. So the Rebbe concludes, Hare, the combination of these three things, oil, wine, and flour, that brings down the pnimius, chokhmah, bina, das, lamata, into this world. And without them, lamata, nothing has been brought down. You're alive, but your life has no meaning. Godliness is in the world to sustain the worlds, but there's no depth. The same is true. If you say Shema, so you're sacrificing to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, so that HaKadosh Baruch Hu remains connected to you, but there's no tefillin. Shema was born by the Shema Chod. Shema is the meditation, and there is nothing besides for God. The idea of Karban, of Krishma, is to say, I am nothing, and the world is nothing, which is nice. If there's nothing besides for the Eibishter and you're batal to Hashem, you live. But you don't experience. Or tefillin, and when you put on the tefillin, hamshachas echad der echad. That richness, that joy, that depth is brought down ala klaf, agashmin, a physical piece of parchment, that you can experience the pnimius of Elokus, which is the kavon. Or blay tefillin, if you do the krishma, you have the sacrifice, you have the giving away, the bittling yourself to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and you don't have the tefillin shlehim shech klum, you bring nothing down. Kiyam Allah, it's kehilu ikir available in mincha v'chul v'dal. You're missing the reichkeit of Chassidus. I'll tell you a word, and for me it's a bissel a personal word, because Reb Nissen Nemenov was my Zayde, my wife Zayde, Olav Hashem. Nissen Nemenov was a very big chassid, and he excelled in Kabbalah sale. It's brought in a number of svarim that Reb Eich the Masmid, who, each of the Masmid was in a category of himself. When he saw Reb Nissen, they used to call him in those days Nissen Zlobiner. He was a kid, 14, 15, 16 years old. So when he came to where Taim Chatmimim was, in those years, he said, I met Nissen Zlobiner, und in dem Inyan von Kabbalah Seil, wird alle meine besteigen. He was so impressed with this young boy who had such discipline, such bittul, such Kabbalah Seil. So there's a long story, which I don't have time to tell you. But the Nekuda is that Nissen was a mashgiach of Taim as a bacher yet. And Rabbi the Masmid came to town. And Reb Nissen wanted to go to the Fabrengen so bad. But he was responsible for the Bachrim. So he organized the Bachrim, and he waited till everybody was sitting and learning and disappeared. The Bachrim saw his itch, and they saw him disappear, and they knew exactly where he went. So they also snuck out of Seder and went to the Fabreng, and they didn't know how Reb Nissen would react. But the bottom line is they came into the Fabrengen, and Reb Mendel Futterfass was one of the Bachrim, and he told the story. The difference in years between Mendel Futterfass and Nissen Nemenov was 3 years Sachakal. And Nissen was the Mashgiach, and he was a Talmud. Anyway, they came in, and Reb Nissen saw them and allowed them to stay. And Reb Yitzchak the Masmid, and I think Reb Zalman was pounding away at Reb Nissen. And he said to him, Malchus is menish v'yein sfidas, to aganza binyan. Which means in context, Kabbalah Seil is very important. But it doesn't make a person, it's an aspect. There has to be a whole person. And the whole person is Chochma Bina Vadas. In other words, Chassidus is so much about the bittul. But the purpose of the bittul is the Reichkeit, that you should experience the richness of Getlachkeit. And the richness of Getlachkeit, this is the return. This is the Shemen and the Yayin and the Seiles, the Chochma and the Bina and the Das. And that's what this Maamar is about. Einyan Hanesachim. To explain the concept of a Nesach, and as I added to our conversation, that Nesachim only begin when they came into Eretz Yisrael, because Karbonos was sacrifice. And that the reward for the sacrifice of a Karban was that you were alive. You connected to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But the Nesach was that it wasn't enough to be alive and you're connected to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. You need to experience the richness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And this is the Shuv, which is through the Shem and the Yayin and the Seiles, which is compared to Inyan Film. That's the Maamar. And now the Rebbe adds one more thing. This one more thing is specific to wine. Meaning to say, we spent most of our time talking about wine. But in the last 15 lines, we discovered that everything we said about wine applies also to oil and to flour, because all three aspects, oil, wine, flour, are part of the mincha and the nesach, or as they're called in halachic terms, nesach includes all three things, because all three bring the richness of godliness to the world and to the person in different ways, chochma bina v'das. But there's one way in which wine is permanently different than shemen and mincha and seilas. Because the oil and the flour went on the mizbeach, the wine was poured through these sheetin, through these tiny little holes, and went down under the ground. Says the Rabbi, the one aspect where you have to continue to separate the wine from the oil and the flour of the Nesachim endeavor is that after all the flour and the oil also went up, and the wine not only came down, it went beneath the ground, the time into the depth, into the abyss. What is the significance of this aspect? So the Rebbe says it's another birur. And I'm going to preface, if you will. The korban is our giving. And when we give, it goes from earth to heaven. And its journey from earth to heaven involves a series of birurim as it ascends higher and higher until it reaches Elokus. And then, of course, if you have the yayin and the shemen and the kemach, it comes back down in terms of reichkeit. But wine goes beneath the ground to elevate and to correct klipos that are so far lost that only the koyach of pnimius can descend so low to elevate. In other words, only when you bring into this world the pnimius of godliness, which is the richness of elokus, which is the purpose of this world, can you elevate the lowest klipos. And the idea that the wine crept into the ground underneath the mizbeach represents this. Says the Rebbe, who, in order to explain this idea, let's go to another concept. So it says in the Torah, God Almighty created the world, there was water. And the water covered the entire earth. And then the Eibusha started making the divisions. One division was a heaven division between higher waters and lower waters. There was higher waters, which goes on a more spiritual thing. There's lower waters, which goes on a more physical thing. And when the Eibusha created the world, there was no separation between these waters. Translates the Rebbe, at one point, all of the different waters spiritually were the same. In other words, water existed only in a more spiritual state. There was no such thing as actual physical water. But as I see momentarily, the fact that all the waters were mixed meant that the lowest level of water was a little bit higher. but it also meant that the highest level of water was a little bit lower because they were mixed together. There was a spirit of Elokim above the water. And this water was right beneath the spirit of Elokim, so it stands to reason that the water represents a metaphysical idea. The waters above which the Ruach Elokim hovered were spiritual waters. That Mayim is Choch. And the Rebbe goes into explaining this, and I'm not going to discuss it. It's the idea of Choch, which is in between Eid and Rakia. And waters, which come from Chochmah, is the power to purify those who are unclean. So the Rebbe says as follows: on the second day, he separated between the higher waters and the lower waters. So what happened? The spiritual aspect of this mix of water became more spiritual than they were prior to the separation. So the water aspect that represents the spiritual, namely Chochmah, became even more spiritual. In the lower waters, Nizgashma became more material, Mayim Gashma become physical waters. Like by way of analogy, a barrel of wine. When it's mixed with residue, with sediment. So of course, the wine isn't clear. But the residue, the waste, is not as coarse, because it's mixed together. If you allow it to settle, the bottom is pure junk. It's pure residue. But when it's mixed together, the wine isn't as clear and the residue isn't as useless. When you allow the sediment to settle, the wine becomes clear. And the residue, the sediment, becomes very, very coarse. Kach says that on line 153, initially, the higher waters were not that high, and the lower waters were not that low. And as a result of the separation, the higher waters became even more spiritual. And the lower waters became physical, but that's not the end of the story. Why not? Because when the lower waters became low, at least there was one thing: the globe was covered with water. So at least water was above earth. Then what happens the next day? On Tuesday, Nemar, the waters of the earth separated and allowed the earth to rise. Right? Like it says in Yishonim, that one of the great miracles, it's a special ness that the earth should rise. It says in Yishonim, water is lighter than earth. And accordingly, the whole world should really be underneath earth and at the surface water. It's a special moifis that the earth should rise and the waters should settle. And now you have land, and you have sea, and you have something else. The waters are beneath the earth. The waters that are underneath the heavens should collect to one place. And you should have an ocean, a big basin in which there is water, and next to it you should have a continent, dry land. And underneath that land, you also have waters. And the waters that are beneath the earth are called the abyss. Which are even further. Hashem shouted at the waters to part and allow the earth to rise. And it isn't that the waters went to the side, the waters went underneath. Says the Rebbe that this gairo b'chinas gvuras v'dinim yesa. So you have three levels of water. You have the water which became heavenly, the water which is on the surface of the earth, and the oceans, and the lakes, and the rivers, and so on, and the waters which are beneath the earth, which are considered the worst. Now the way it's explained, and we've talked about this before, the Hadis Barichas and Shad Amunah, the Mittel Rebbe on Pesach, is that the salt water seeps into the ground at the basin where the water meets the earth, and it's purified, and later it comes out as mayones, as fountains. But when it goes beneath the earth, it's unclean. So the Rebbe says on line 158, "Tutzrichim birur." These waters need to be corrected. By going underneath the ground in these little channels and tunnels and so on. So first they have to be cleansed beneath the earth, and then they re-emerge from the bottom upwards, mismask, and they become sweet. And this is Mayim Chayim, which is what a fountain is. The ocean water is not Mayim Chayim. It's kosher for mikveh, but it's not kosher for mayim chayim, and the mayim chayim are needed to be metayed various different tumas. V'chein lenida v'zova ta'arasan v'mayim chayim. Dafka nida and zova is purified dafka with living waters, and so on. And you should know that the Maamar Einyan of the and this mayim, the Alter Rebbe has a very big tzarechiyun because you need mayim chayim for a zov. You don't need mayim chayim for nida and zova, and the Alter Rebbe brings here nida and zova need mayim chayim. And there's a whole arichas. You could look up the footnote. Who waters that come from a fountain, which are the waters which went even lower, and then are emerging from the earth, can be metayed even with a little bit. Says the Rebbe V'zehu, line 162 now. This explains this last point, that Einyan Hanesachim, that in addition to the wine, which is poured on the Mizbeach, revealing the pnimius of Elokus, the richness of Elokus, the joy of Elokus into this world, it gives a koyach to bring up and to clarify levels of klipa which are otherwise in the Tehom. They poured wine to bring the pnimius into this world. And then v'yedid leteheim, it descends into the abyss pirush. Since you're being empowered from the level of pnimius, it gives a power to descend unbelievably low, and gives kayach in the mata, that even the waters that are beneath the earth, which represent basically klippus, can be purified and uplifted and become the madrega of chokhmah, which is metahir, as mayim chayim, metahir b'mashu, metahir b'zechelin, and so forth and so on. V'zeu b'kedish. B'kedish goes on chokhmah, hasech nesech b'gem, and by pouring wine, and wine by itself is bina. It reaches chokhmah. In other words, the wine by itself is magala pnimius on the level of bina, but by going beneath the earth and being mavada, the lower levels, it comes up to chokhmah. This pouring of wine, which is going to give a pnimis dekakayach, to elevate even the lowest in yadam of klipas, dafka wine. You want a sweeten gevura, you have to go to the root of it, and the root of gevuras is bina, because the mina it's a whole concept in Chassidus that the source of all gevura is bina. I don't have time to explain it to you, but it's a chassadin in bina, and the chassadin in bina becomes its maile. Dafka from bina is the bringing of that pnimius, which is going to eventually be mavarer even the lowest in Yonim and raise them up to the madrega of Chachma. And now the Rebbe finishes. We understand that the korban comes along with a nesach. We understand that the nesach has three parts: Chachma, Bina, Das, Shem, and Yayin, Selas. We further understand that one of these parts is not only bringing the pnimius down, but by bringing down the pnimius, it creates a possibility for an even lower birur. But why are the different shiurim? A par is a chatzi ahin, a ayil is a shlishis ahin, and a keves is a revius ahin. Why? As the pasuk says, chatzi ahin yel a par, half a hin was for a cow, or shlishis ahin la ayil, a third of hin was for a ram, and revius ahin was for a keves. So the Rebbe says, hainu lefi, and the answer is, sham shachol lefi. When you bring something up, it allows you to bring something down. And if what you're bringing up is tougher and a greater sacrifice, you bring down more. So he says, Shalos hapor hu aliyas atzmiyas pnei sheir. A cow represents the epitome of materialism, of klipa, of the toughest thing to elevate. And since it ascends the atzmas of pnei sheir, the essence of what the sheir is, so yeda dam shacham al gam ken b'ribi yesef. What comes down to the consequences more, chatzi hayin, and and when the greater volume of wine from a pot, which is a difficult sacrifice, pours down, it reveals more pnimius, and it's able to go all the way into the Tehom and elevate more of the gevuras kashas. Mashenken ayil va'keves, as opposed to a ram and a goat, a sheep, pardon me. She'einen etzem pnei sheir, they're not as much the essence of the pnei sheir, and therefore the wine that they brought down, the joy that they bring into this world, which is also pnimius, is less, and their ability to elevate the deeper klippus is also less. Line 176. Zehu she'omer Razal, which is pshat in the Gemara in Megillah. And by the way, the mocker is missing in the Maamar Einyan in the Likutei Torah. That when Achashverosh made his feast, he made Shtia Kados. He wanted the Yidden to come, he wanted the Yidden to participate, and of course his kavanah was that they should sin and they should be held accountable. But they needed to do free will, because if he would coerce them, then they wouldn't be liable. So Shtia Kados meant that they were able to drink as they chose. So the Gemara says, Kados Shal Teira. that Achashverosh's feast provided drinking like the Torah requires, which is achila meruba mishter. You eat more than you drink. What is the pshat? You eat more than you drink. You sacrifice more than you get back. Pirush. Shehalo beriba yeser minam shacha. The korban aspect, the sacrifice aspect that you give to bring life into the world on a chiteniyazdika level, is more minam shacha than the life of pnimius, which you subsequently bring down. Or kamay min azal. It says alternatively, ein tipa yeded malmayla. One drop does not descend from heaven. Elim kein tapayim elim kenegde b'chol. Unless 2 drops ascend from earth to heaven to meet it. And of course, this is a physical concept about the moisture around the world versus what comes from heaven to earth. And it's a mashal for explaining that the purpose is to raise up in order to bring down. And you're raising up much more than you're bringing down, but what you're bringing down is necessary in order to be able to make a birur. First of all, in order to make gishmak and lichtik in the world, and then, as the Rebbe said here at the end of the Maimer, to create a secondary birur of the tehoim, of what's severe gevurus. Ubegemara al poseh begam yekev chotzav bei elu ashit. Yekev means a place where you make wine, and there's a pasuk begam yekev chotzav bei, which is interpreted to mean shitin, the idea that the wine descends into the abyss. Ubemeir eides yutzif chav gimel. He translates the word yekev as yichud havayin elakim. Yaakov, because Yaakov is 112, and 112 is the gematria of Havaya and Elakim. Elakim is 86, Havaya is 26, together it's 112. So the idea of Elakim is what's low, the idea of Havaya is what's high, and you bring down Havaya to Elakim to be mavared even the lowest in Yonah. What separates the waters from the waters is Elakim, which conceals. Like the pasuk says, Geshemesh Amogen V'Gim. U'b'nesachem ksiv asech nesach sheich ala Havaya. You draw down Shem Havaya. Shemamshichem gili Shem Havaya. You draw down Shem Havaya to a pnimius. Liich mesameach Shem Elakim, to give joy to Shem Elakim. That not only the pnimius of Elokus should be in this world, but that by bringing the pnimius of Elokus in this world, it introduces a possibility to be mavader something which is even lower. V'zeu the yuchad deshemis of Shem Havaya and Shem Elakim. V'amshachazu nimshach gam b'bchinas mayim tachtenim shemitachas larakia. And of course, even though he doesn't say it, he implies that shemitachas la'oretz, which is the ultimate concept of a gam yakev chotzav bei. I'm sorry I did the last few lines quickly. The spirit of the Maimer is clear.